Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar, National Right-of-Way Map Data for State DOTs and Federal Funding Program Opportunities. My name is Amy, and I'm the Operations Manager here at National States Geographic Information Council. If you are unfamiliar with our organization, NSGIC exists to advance effective national coordination of geospatial information by supporting state-level cooperation. We serve as a national forum for the development of capable and future-oriented geospatial leadership. If you'd like to know more information about how to get involved, please visit our website, www.nisgic.org. Some reminders for our call today: all attendees have been muted on entrance. There will be time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, so please place your questions into the chat box and they will be read aloud at the end of the presentation. Additionally, a recorded version of this webinar will be made available afterwards, so be on the lookout for an email. And with that, I will now turn it over to the presenters. Thank you for joining us. Bill?
Hello, NSGIC community. Thank you very much for taking some time this afternoon to learn a little bit more about Acopia. I see a lot of familiar names and familiar people who are familiar with our organization here today, but we're really looking forward to exploring and telling you a little bit more about the work that we're doing specifically in the transportation and long-term planning space. And also ending sort of our chat today with a case study that we're working with the Illinois Department of Transportation, and also sort of walking you through some of the funding, the federal funding opportunities that we're learning more and more about, and helping MPOs and state DOTs access some of those dollars so that we can help map out the entire country. My name is Bill Singleton. I'm the Vice President here of Acopia AI. I've been with the organization for 7 years now. Really excited to have the opportunity to discuss today's topic with you. Just at a high level, really our main organization is focused on solving the problem of the massive amount of pixels that are available in the marketplace. Going back 7 to 10 years ago, our organization, our founders identified that there was a lot of satellite, aerial, and other optical sources that were going severely underutilized, just because there just wasn't enough hands or people to be able to convert all of that great information into HD vector maps so that we could help support the GIS industry. There's two main issues there. So really what you have is the underutilization of optical imagery, but then also the length of time that it takes in order to convert great aerial imagery into these maps so that GIS professionals can start getting to work and driving to those insights to help with long-term planning initiatives. So really our organization just wants to be that layer where we can help convert that massive amount of pixelated data so that we can be a great data service / content provider for all of your GIS teams. So just in terms of today's agenda, I know a lot of you might be familiar with our organization. I'm going to start sort of at a high level with Acopia's vision and a brief overview of our process. I'm happy to answer any other questions regarding to that, but I do really want to get to some of the applications and demo data of how MPOs and state DOTs are using some of the data sets that we're providing on a national basis. I think it's a great way to sort of spur some of the questions to show how your peers are using this information on a day-to-day basis. We're then going to jump into, Troy is going to do a quick presentation of our federal funding programs and sort of some of the analysis we've done there to see what kind of dollars can be accessed and what kind of programs this kind of data set can qualify for. And then we're going to end off with the case study of how we're working with multiple levels of government to create HD transportation data sets on a countrywide scale to help organizations at every level. When Acopia initially got our start, we were focused on some basic, extracting some basic geometric features like building footprints and road networks across the globe for federal entities from satellite imagery. But what we recognized was if we started to use higher resolution aerial data sets, there was a number of other features that we could use the same identical technology for and expand our portfolio greatly to really help with asset management and planning at the municipal and state level. And that's where you've seen us expand from just looking at some of these basic features to really trying to extract a number of different things. And I know we've talked a lot with the NSGIC community about some of the natural and impervious features work we're doing with NOAA. But now we're actually also expanding that to include many different items in the transportation right of way. And I'm looking forward to going through some of those examples a little bit later on in the presentation. Just at a high level for anyone who's new to learning about our organization, we are an AI organization who has been doing this for just about 10 years now. So we have been doing mapping projects in over 100 countries, supporting hundreds of customer applications all across the globe. NOAA is a huge supporter, and we'd like to work very closely with them on their coastal change management program. But we've also done things like 3D building models for organizations like NASA, and working with NGOs and the World Bank for initiatives all across Africa. So this is a really tried and tested data set that provides high accuracy in order to help with the GIS community. These are some of the examples that we will be talking about a little bit later on. I won't spend too much time here, but really what we want to discuss is that we are already engaged with 9 of the top 10 MPOs by population. We have reached out to the top 200, and we have a list of over 50 that we've started to work with as moving forward into 2023. So we're really excited about our capabilities to be able to provide this base data set across the entire country. So what is Ecopia's process? As I mentioned, our system is image agnostic. So we got our start with satellite imagery, but now we've expanded to collect aerial data across the entire country. So we are engaged with all of the major providers. However, we are working very closely with Hexagon to create a nationwide data set so that we have full state coverage for all of for the entire country. And so really what we also do want to highlight, though, that there is a potential for us to work with historic data or information that some of the MPOs or state level governments have already made investments in. So there's a lot of different ways that we can help convert pixelated data based on the requirements of your individual GIS teams. And really what we're starting to do is once we create this base layer, we're starting to add more and more information on top of that. So just like we got our start with building footprints and roads, now working to include natural features, impervious surfaces, adding then 3D. And then we start to use alternate data like things like addressing, which I'll talk about a little bit later on the presentation, to create more and more, a much more robust data layer that's getting closer and closer to creating that digital twin of the future, so that we can have a much better understanding of all the assets that municipalities, state level government, and the federal level is required to maintain. I will quickly touch on our process. So essentially what our organization has been doing is we've created a semi-automated process that's based on the AWS platform, so that we can scale it based on our customers' requirements in terms of being able to churn through massive terabytes of pixelated data in a very short period of time. One of the most important things that we do like to remind our customers is that it's an iterative approach, an iterative system where all of our results are triple checked by a team of expert annotators so that we can guarantee the highest quality of results. Many of you on the call might be familiar with other kinds of automated approaches or automated software that's available on the marketplace. And a lot of those systems require lots of different parameters to be set and really only get you results that can get you sort of 60 to 70% accuracy. So there's a lot of post-editing that's required. Our main focus is to generate maps that require minimal post-editing or eliminate the need for post-editing whatsoever. And so we really want to be able to create maps that can go right directly into your environment and conflate those maps to some of the data sets that you already have in place, so that we're not disturbing any of your current workflows. And so what does that allow us to do? It allows us to build HD vector maps across the entire country with that human level accuracy, because everything has been triple checked, and we're able to create that at scale and make sure that everything is up to date with the latest aerial imagery as it's collected. So I do want to sort of jump into, this is the most important piece of the presentation. I would like to go through how some of your peers are using some of these transportation vector data sets. And I'm going to sort of go through each one of these applications. But this is sort of a high level list of how some of the MPOs and state level governments are using our data sets today. So if you just give me one moment, I'm going to switch over. Can everyone see my screen? Sorry, just a quick confirmation.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So the first example that I'm going to bring up is actually one of our oldest, but it is an interesting use case because even just these basic features that are being highlighted here, so sidewalks, and different kinds of crosswalks and parking lots, which I'm pulling in right now, are helping three major different applications across different MPOs across the country. This data set that you're looking at was actually created for SEMCOG a few years ago. And in this particular sample, they wanted to have an understanding of where all of their pedestrian transportation networks were across the entire region. And so with this analysis, they were able to determine that 76% of their population was within 100 feet of the nearest pedestrian sidewalk, which is great, but it also means that almost 24% of the population does not have access to these kinds of critical infrastructure. And actually, these are the populations that typically rely on mass transit the most. And so you have situations where they can, even just visually, you can start to look at which neighborhoods might need future investment to have a better understanding of where some of this infrastructure is not currently in place. We're actually also using a similar data set, which we just finished for San Francisco and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. That was actually in support of Vision Zero initiatives. So in terms of Vision Zero, they were actually taking incident data and merging that with their basic road network. But really, that was not painting a full picture of why there were incidents or casualties at certain intersections, because they didn't have a full understanding of why were there issues at certain areas or certain intersections. And so what that we were able to do with by providing sidewalks and crosswalks was understanding where there might be some low-hanging fruit for their organization to actually add certain infrastructure to reduce the amount of fatalities or casualties in their system. One of the examples is there was several different examples where there was a long stretch of roadway without a crosswalk and in between two shopping centers. And so there was a lot of individuals that were actually crossing a large roadway, a multi-lane roadway, without going to the actual intersection, which was too far away. And so they were able to understand where they should be putting some new crosswalks in order to help try to make their communities safer. The last example is actually a project that we just finished with the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board. So they were actually doing access and mobility modeling, trying to understand how people, what is the length of time that it takes to commute via pedestrian roadways or pedestrian walking between different areas. So they were actually able to develop and create isochrones to understand what is the length of time to traverse two different commercial areas. So this next sample that I'm actually going to be pulling up was presented at the Esri UC this year by the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. In this particular sample, which is very close to what we'll be providing for every MPO across the state of Chicago, is a much more thorough look at everything in the transportation right of way. So I can zoom out here very quickly, and we can bring up things like sidewalks, so you can see where there's interruptions in the sidewalks, as we said in our previous piece. But now we're starting to look at many other different kinds of features that might be required to be maintained by the Transportation and Planning Board. So things like painted medians, which is something that we also provided for the city of LA, understanding raised medians as well. And then looking at different things like marked bike lanes. So this is adding on to our work with sidewalks, so that you can have an understanding on a statewide level where all your active transportation planning might be in the future. And so then we can also look at different things like slip turn lanes and different kinds of traffic circles, which start to become more apparent when you start to look at all of the additional features which can be brought in. One of the pieces that is also of interest to some of the state DOTs is shoulder identification. So in all of these linear geometric features also include a width calculation, so that you can actually put them into several different modeling applications so that you can understand and create a more even, complete streets planning model. One of the last things that I'll also highlight, so this is actually something that's been of interest in Texas, Florida, and Los Angeles, is understanding how pedestrian right-of-way intersects with canopy models. And so this is actually done so that they can actually address the comfort level of how people are moving and traversing between different kinds of commercial and residential and park areas. And so you can actually take a look and understand where there's shade, so that there's more comfort level for your citizens to move between different kinds of areas. So I did want to just quickly bring this example up. So this is actually a 3D model that we did for LA. We will be doing 3D models, identifying 3D bridges, 3D canopy, and 3D multi-level buildings across the entire country as we move forward through the end of the year. And so this is actually something that has been of interest to some DOTs, is understanding where all of the bridge infrastructure is across all of these communities. And all of these bridges will also have a height determination as well. So this is just something that will also be available off the shelf on a countrywide scale for DOTs. This is actually a stormwater application. However, I did want to identify this because this is another piece that will be provided to IDOT and CMAP. We are going to be doing an impervious understanding which of these features are paved and unpaved in terms of the transportation portfolio. So this is actually something that we update for Detroit every year. And so we can also start to add additional attribution to the transportation features that you're seeing in the previous examples that we provided. This last example before I head back and turn it over to Troy for some of the federal funding opportunities is one that I'm most excited about. So this is actually for public works and pavement management. So in this particular example, we're using high quality aerial imagery to identify all of the painted markings across urban centers across the country. And so you can see here, even when we do have some occlusions or shadowing, we're still able to identify where all of these painted lines exist. And I can actually turn this on and on just to give you guys a little bit of a sense of where that is. So this has actually been also helpful for permitting. So when when civil engineers are actually identifying areas where they might need to rip up and have some construction, and then also helping some cities identify on-street parking, which I know can sometimes be a problem for certain cities. So this is something that by using our technology, we're able to identify these features fairly easily. Because they come out of the pavement and it's easy for our automated system to be able to detect those. So I will just give me one moment. One of the last applications I would like to talk about was one of the first products that our team created. This is related to transportation, but it's been hugely supportive of our NextGen 911, our foray into NextGen 911. One of the first nationwide products that we created was a building footprint map, which we keep up to date every year. But what our team has done is taken multiple sources of data and mixed them together and actually created building-based XY coordinates for primary and secondary addresses across the country. And so this is great, especially in suburban and rural areas, where a lot of this data can be either parcel-centric or interpolated to the road network. And so really what we're trying to do is to help with the linear referencing system and to move from a theoretical addressing system to something that is much more that is focused on actual addressing. So really having a much more precise understanding of where these buildings are located in real life, so that when you do have an emergency situation, you don't have these services being sent out to a potential parcel centroid or somewhere where there isn't even a driveway. So I will, with that, I would like Troy I'll allow Troy to quickly introduce himself and to go over some of the federal programs that we've been working with.
Sure. So I'm Troy Simpson, came from an MPO background, working under the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning umbrella. I do appreciate a little slip earlier, Bill, where you said Chicago as the state for Illinois, because there are probably some people north and south of I-80 that would like it that way. But yeah, just as a reference for that, it's kind of a dual MPO state-led project that ended up going out to all the MPOs, and we really appreciate CMAP taking the lead on that. So yeah, under CMAP, I essentially worked under their team on transitioning to performance-based programming of federal funds, primarily just for the federal aid highway network, if you're not familiar. But as a part of that, I spent a lot of time on integrating bike ped and ADA prioritization into capital programs. But of course, in the Chicago area, 286 municipalities with an even higher number of individual road districts, including the state, counties, and townships within. It makes it very, very hard to maintain data sets on active transportation infrastructure and other performance criteria at a regional level, almost to the point where really we were stuck updating even bikeway inventories on a 3 to 5 year cycle. So something like the products that Ecopia provide really make a big difference in terms of identifying those areas and basically monitoring the change and performance over time for the sake of what an MPO wants to report. Just going to talk a little bit about IJA, and I want to make a note. I'm sure maybe a lot of you are familiar, but some major hallmarks from the passage of that bill that are really exciting are data-friendly grant avenues. So ones that have very, very clear and defined scope for the purchasing of data or the purchasing of services that relate to, say, location-based services or travel, that sort of thing. It has identified a lot of new opportunities to that effect and integrated into existing programs. There are a lot of new direct USDOT discretionary programs. So ones where basically sub-entities of the state are able to apply directly for their funds. It's no longer just limited to kind of those really major national significance project programs. It's actually going down to the local level. So it helps to handle some of the discrepancies between local agencies and the states that they lie within for the programs that they want to access. And as a result, it raised the profile of a lot of sub-state entities. MPOs are really well highlighted in it. And it increased demand for state MPO coordination. So that was a big theme when we were at ASHTO this year and continues to be. So yeah, without further ado, I guess I'll just kind of kick it off with the first. So Safe Streets and Roads for All, if you're not familiar, is one of the new discretionary programs that comes direct from the USDOT. It essentially is a program that is targeting the Vision Zero efforts and the National Roadway Safety Plan put forth by the USDOT. But it's a grant program that's accessible for all units of government. So it includes MPOs, counties, municipalities, any transit, special taxing districts, tribal governments directly, as well as any grouping of those if they find that there's a scale that existing boundaries don't serve for them for the purpose of a project or an analysis. It is at the $1 billion a year funding level. Some news from a couple of friends at USDOT indicate perhaps that this first year, as might be expected, the number of applications may not total, or almost all of the applications may be funded through it. So definitely they're looking for a much broader range of applications. But of course, this past September was the first call cycle. So I think a lot of us know how that goes. But it is annual. Every May it's supposed to open, September close. So it's $1 billion per year, 80% federal max, all the way through fiscal year 2026 for the federal government. And it's kind of two-pronged in the approach. You basically have to have an existing safety action plan in place as a local agency, or you have to be covered by one from any of the agencies that you are a member within. So say if an NPO has a safety action plan that covers local priorities, or that is intended to, that helps you to access the construction grants. But the grant program doesn't leave people hanging. It will also fund the development of a safety action plan. So the safety action plan actually does, or at least the criteria for the grant program do specify and raise the profile of GIS data for safety. So a lot of actual visual, evidence-based safety priorities, not just putting in a planning document and saying, we generally support this type of project. We will give points to a project that reduces safety in a single spot, but actually really planning the work out ahead is given a really high priority. So those for any unit of government are, at least on the planning side, are 200,000 to $1 million on the local, 200K to 5 million on the regional level, and that includes kind of any grouping. It doesn't necessarily have to be an NPO. It can be a group of municipalities in a rural area, rural transportation planning organization, that sort of thing. Yeah, the safety action plan grants are very exciting in terms of data procurement, because they very specifically will allow that not only in the initial development of a safety action plan, if that's needed for the entity that's applying, but also in subsequent years, even if the agency is financing construction through the grant program, they can still tack on incremental improvements to their safety plan, depending on their local needs. So you could start out with the initial plan, purchase a particular set of data. You might learn something over the next year or two at conferences, and you can actually tweak that plan as you're going along. It's not a fixed point in time. So in terms of federal programs, it's probably one of the most innovative that I have ever seen. So the next one is the increasing safe and accessible transportation options segment of formula funding. So this comes out of essentially for states, the state planning and research funds, which a lot of states use to procure data, or in the case of an NPO, metropolitan planning funds. Essentially, they're required to expend 2.5% of their state planning and research on the state side, or on the NPO side, 2.5 of their metropolitan planning program funds for the purposes of complete streets, transportation plans that intersect with active transportation, mobility, accessibility, public transit, or alternatives to highway expansion specifically. There is an opt-out for this if the NPO has complete street standards or policies in place to qualify, but that essentially the NPO is not able to access those funds, or the state is not able to access those funds if they don't have that in place. So if they didn't have something that qualified and they didn't kind of submit it to the USDOT as part of their burden of proof, then that's something that they can use the funds for. And the next one would be carbon reduction program. This one is formula based. So it gets distributed down through the USDOT, states, NPOs. But both the states and NPOs administer their own segments of it. The funding level is going to vary based on which state you're in. It's totally customizable, although the amounts, the totals for carbon reduction program funds are listed on the USDOT website every year with the new budget release. So you can see down to the state and the NPO level how much funds are going in any given year. But they have a pretty open set of uses, mostly intended around any strategies that reduce carbon emissions. So there's a lot of crossover with the congestion mitigation and air quality funding that you may be familiar with from maybe working with NPOs or states. And yeah, so there's single occupancy vehicle alternatives, quantification of emissions if you want to do an emissions inventory. We had a nonprofit in the Chicago area that did the emissions inventory initially, but the MPO took a big role in it. Specific infrastructure funding, any kind of like non-capacity improvements to infrastructure, as well as some ITS integration into the transit system, street lighting retrofits, and the traditional diesel retrofits that get funded through the infrastructure bills over the years for locomotives for transit systems. But the planning for active transportation facilities or those kinds of things is actually an eligible use for these funds too. So they're not just restricted to specifically building infrastructure. And the next is one that has, I was actually maybe going to mention Protect, but I might have a different slide deck here. There was one I was going to talk about. Protect is all caps acronym. It is a specific grant program. It's another new, it's actually mixed formula and discretionary. So that program directly administers funding to the states as part of formula, and also provides it at the federal level as a discretionary program. They are specifically focused on transportation system resiliency. So as a part of that, procuring data sets such as kind of like a 3D road layer, anything that would be used for flood modeling, or determining scenarios for flood planning where you'll have restricted access routes based on their environmental risk is included as a part of it. So it's a pretty revolutionary thing for the US DOT. A lot of crossover between the stormwater and transportation data that's available there. And the last one here is just the upcoming federal opportunities. So these are ones that, you may be familiar, of course, with the appropriations process. They are approved, but they're not appropriated specifically yet. So you'll see them as line items in the bill. You'll see them in the federal reports, but they're upcoming ones to keep an eye out on. First is the Healthy Streets program. That one's discretionary competitive. It's another direct from the US DOT. It's going to be at a funding level of $100 million a year, 80% federal funding as per typical. And some of the highlights from it are, it's essentially a grant program that's intended to mitigate health and environmental risks as a result of urban heat islands. So it will actually pay directly for both the data procurement for tree canopy and individual street trees for the purposes of expansion. It'll pay for inventorying and the expansion of green infrastructure, as well as the replacement of impervious surfaces if you want to apply any kind of experimental cool pavements, permeable pavements. It has an arm for research funding in terms of procuring the information needed to plan for it, as well as the actual infrastructure itself. And the last one is the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. This one has a pretty small segment. It's mostly targeted toward the construction of kind of off-street, some on-street, but it's really targeted more toward off-street active transportation facilities. But there is a $3 million a year planning grant set for the purpose of active transportation infrastructure. So some applicable data sets that can be procured under it would be essentially along like an active transportation spine, something that's existing in a community. If you're identifying opportunities spatially for the installation of that infrastructure, that's something that can definitely apply. But those are just two to keep, to keep a lookout for in the future. And there's quite a lot of crossover with what we do and quickly to assist with those. The example earlier for Healthy Streets, that data can assist San Bernardino essentially in applying for a Healthy Streets grant, and they can go direct to construction because they have the full burden of proof that they've got their planning environment set. So yeah, if there are any questions about that, I'll definitely take some time to answer them or follow up on them. And if you'd like, we can kind of send you these slides too with some summary info.
Great, thank you so much, Troy. So just to wrap up today's presentation, a lot of you on this call have heard about our work with NOAA to help with the Coastal Change Management Program, but we did want to highlight an exciting announcement with our collaboration. We've expanded some of the work that we initially were doing with NOAA to extract some basic data across the Great Lakes. And now we're working with all 3 levels of government to create a statewide HD transportation data set. I did want to sort of walk you through sort of the history behind that. What we've seen as an organization is that we're already engaging with some of the biggest MPOs across the country. And really what we want to be able to do, even if it's just some basic features like the first one I mentioned with SEMCOG, that the sidewalk and the crosswalks with width measurements can help a number of different applications from Vision Zero to ADA compliance, to even just having a better understanding of asset management across the entire area. But really where we want to be able to do is expand those conversations from just the MPO level to working with other state agencies across the country, so that we can provide the same level and high quality data to secondary and tertiary villages and cities who might not have the same infrastructure or personnel to extract this kind of information on an annual basis. And that's where we're really excited, because we have committed to building a lot of this data across the country in terms of our basic data set, but it's very easy for us to start to bolt on specific pieces of our portfolio while we go through the country with our initial creation. So we would love to have the opportunity to expand those conversations as from our MPO discussions that we're already having to some of the other state level individuals to see if there's any other information that we can help provide from either your own aerial imagery or from the aerial partners that we're already working with across the country. I did want to just take a quick sort of a quick look at how some of the early applications are looking from the CMAP team, because I think that this is something that we're also really excited about. Is we're always finding new applications and new ways that this data set is being used, and that's why we love to stay in contact with the individuals that we're working with at all 3 levels of government, because we're finding more and more ways how this data can help either alternate data sets or even just help with asset management by itself after it's been developed. And so this is actually just a few story maps. I mean, all of our data can be used with any kind of application, especially in Esri. But you can start to look at things. This is just looking at the sidewalk layer, and you can even focus in here. And what the CMAP team had done was to add street view images to this information. Oh, sorry. I can just zoom out here so that you could see the interruptions in sidewalks. There we go. So you can see where interruptions in sidewalks are taking place. And so this is just with some of the first initial proof of concept data that we sent over and focused specifically on sidewalks. And then there's other features which I'm happy to send these storyboard maps over to the group, just being mindful of time and leaving some room for questions. But there's other things like understanding land use cases around different kinds of subway stations and doing different kinds of corridor analysis within the city. So there's a lot of different ways that we're starting to see how this data can be used, but we're excited to share this and to keep the conversation going with those on this call. And with that, I'll take a quick pause here and open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Bill and Troy. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to place them in the chat box and I'll read them aloud. We'll give folks another minute just in case. We have one question. How does your AI work with extracting GIS vector features from imagery?
So essentially the process has been, it's a proprietary system we've built internally. We use Amazon Web Services in order to be able to turn up our compute power of the GPUs that we're using. So it's essentially a distributed neural network that we're using in order to identify differences in pixels. And so there's four main categories that we're typically looking at. So we're looking at pixelated data in terms of the differences in geometry, color, texture, but also the context of other pixels. So essentially we're using a window whenever we're trying to identify what each pixel is, to see what other related pixels are in that area, to help us with identification and inferring if in case there's different differences or occlusions or shadowing that might be blocking certain features. So that's the first stage of the process. Essentially what we're doing is we're trying to create a probability map on a pixel by pixel basis, and then we're modeling out those probability maps into vector polygons. And then all of those vector polygons are actually QC'd by our team, so that what we're doing is we're actually, every time that we identify a polygonal feature that we might have gotten wrong, a polygonal or a linear feature where there might be a mistake, we're including that in our training sample for future reference, so that we can get better at extracting those kind of features in the future from that kind of data set.
So another question, two parts. What kind of satellite data do you use? And how is the mechanism for backend data processing?
So typically in terms of the products that we were discussing today, unless we have a requirement to have more immediate updating, we will try to focus on using predominantly aerial imagery, especially for some of the more detailed assets that we're trying to extract. We did get our start working with satellite imagery, just a little bit of history. So we actually use, we have done extraction off of Planet, but typically the predominant source was Maxar and Airbus imagery when we initially started. And so similar to our process with aerial imagery, we're intaking the optical imagery. We can use 3-band or 4-band imagery. It's typically what a predominant amount of projects are based off of, and then we insert that with our AWS system. We process that with our system online.
That seemed like to be the last question in the chat box. If anyone else has any last minute questions, please feel free to put them in and I'll read them aloud. One is, do you use any satellite radar imagery to avoid the impact of clouds, weather, or sun?
So great question. We typically haven't used SAR as much. So we've been mainly focused on using 3-band or multispectral imagery. That's just typically what we've found is very abundant and allows us to do a lot of different kinds of extraction between natural and man-made and human-made features. And so we haven't used that. Typically in the past, because we're using aerial imagery that supported things like NAPE, we already have access to a lot of cloud-free imagery. And we can also use basically either cross-track satellite or multiple sources of aerial in order to combat the issues with clouds. So typically we will either work with our satellite providers to create a cloud-free mosaic, or we can work with aerial imagery that typically tries to remove those issues, or we can work with multiple or several different sources in order to get to that same result.
Well, that seemed like to be the last question. Oh, and Scott asked, are you able to extract basic pavement condition given good enough imagery?
Scott, that's a great question. So typically, so far with aerial imagery, we can identify between paved and unpaved. That's some of the main attribution that we've been doing. However, in 2023, by the middle of the year, we're actually going to be using a lot of potentially oblique and street view data sets to identify things like street city furniture. And with that product, we're still working with it, but we are able to identify pavement quality. That's a question that we tend to like to have a little bit of a deeper dive with each individual client, because everybody sort of has a different requirement in terms of how that attribution should take place. Is it sort of how many categories your team might be looking for? But that's something I would love to be able to discuss with you in the future.
Is there anyone else who have any questions? Seemed like Scott's question seemed to be the last in the chat box.
Well, if that's the last question, I did want to say, Amy, thank you so much for putting this all together. Thank you for the NSGIC community. We're really excited to be building out. We've already elected to build most of this data for the country. And so we would love the opportunity to get engaged with you, because every state is a little bit different in terms of how they want features identified, or what's the particular use case it's supporting, whether it's whether it's for your sort of network and mobility analysis, or whether maybe it's for Vision Zero safety initiatives. And so we love to have those conversations before we finish building it out this year. And so, and we are already engaged with many different MPOs and city level government and municipal or metropolitan level government across the country. And so we'd love to just continue this conversation, and we're excited to show you more as we build this out. And we attend the next NSGIC coming up in a couple months.
That's right, mid-year meeting 2023 at the end of February. Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Troy, for your presentation today. It was a lot of great information, and thank you to our audience for participating today. And just a reminder, this is a recorded session that will be sent out later for reference, or if anyone missed it. Any last words, Bill, or?
No, that's great. Please, looking forward to seeing everybody coming up soon. And yes, everyone have a safe and great end to the year. And if I don't talk to you, happy holidays.
Thank you so much, Bill. All right, and thank you everyone for attending today. Y'all have a great afternoon.